Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Suranjali Seal, and like I always say, if you are somebody that loves literature and is all about literature, then this is the channel for you. In our video today, we're going to talk about the life and works of the Bronte sisters. The Brontes are widely celebrated, widely read, and are very, very popular, and rightly so, because they have produced great classic works of literature that have stood the test of time and continue to inspire us even today in the 21st century. So we as students of literature have to read them, and of course we know that literature is an expression of life, right? So in our video today, we're going to talk about the life of the Bronte sisters. Once we understand them and their experiences and the age to which they belong to and the obstacles that they overcame, we can appreciate their works a little bit more and enjoy them a little bit more as well. So in our video today, we're going to talk about the life of the Bronte sisters, and in my next video, the upcoming video after this, I am going to really recommend really good classics that they have written. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So for the introduction, let us just have a look at what the family was like, an overall understanding of who the Brontes were. So the Brontes were a 19th century literary family. So 19th century, Victorian era. So they belonged to the Victorian era and they were a literary family. There's nothing to brainstorm or complicated about it, okay? Literary family means most of them were either writers, novelists, poets. We know Charlotte, Emily and Anne they are celebrated as writers of classic literature, right? So, they belong to a literary family, and they were born in the village of Thornton and later associated with the village of Haworth in the West Riding of Yorkshire, England. So, the thing is, over here, we have certain facts. That is, which other places they were associated with, where were they born. These are facts. There's nothing to explain there. But what are the things that you have to understand? That if you write answers, you have to mention these key facts, that they belong to a literary family. So if you belong to a literary family, if your sisters are writing, if your brothers are writing, that will have an influence on you. Your sisters and brothers, their creativity, their ideas will have an influence on you because you're seeing them every day inside the household. That is the first thing that you have to analyze. Second thing, 19th century, Victorian age. Victorian age had its own plus points. It also has its own minus points, and both of them have an impact on the sensibilities of the writers, right? Because they lived in that age, and the age, of course, has its impact on the lives of the people that live in it. So the Victorian era had its impact on the writers as well. So this is the thing that you have to overall understand. Now let's look at the family tree. You have Patrick and Maria, the mother and father of the Brontes. Now you have the siblings. Look at the number of siblings that these people have, okay? You have 5 sisters and 1 brother. So the eldest, we know Charlotte, Emily and Anne Bronte, but there were the other 2 as well, the eldest 2. So you have Maria and then you have Elizabeth. Maria and Elizabeth. Maria is the first child, Elizabeth is the second. Then you have Charlotte. Charlotte is the third daughter. Then you have Patrick Branwell. Patrick is the only son that Patrick and Maria have. The father and mother, the Brontes, they have Patrick Branwell, and you have Charlotte, Patrick, the guy or the son, and then you have Emily, and then you have Anne. So Emily, it's not Charlotte, Emily, Anne. After Charlotte, you have the brother, and then you have Emily and Anne, the youngest 2. So this is the family tree. Now these 3 sisters, that is Charlotte, then you have Emily, and then you have Anne. These 3 sisters and their brother Branwell, who had been born after Charlotte and before Emily, were very close to each other. Now this highlights the fact again that if you have siblings at home and you're all inspired, literary, or you're literally creative, so you will have an influence on each other, right? And they are close to each other. That is a plus point. So as children, they developed their imaginations first through oral storytelling and play set in an intricate imaginary world, and then through the collaborative writing of increasingly complex stories set in the fictional world. So I'll tell you this. You have three sisters and 1 brother. Now these 4 are very close to each other. So you remember in our day-to-day life also, when we are kids, we weave our imaginary world, right? Sometimes we are soldiers, sometimes we're pirates. Even kids who play kitchen sets, kitchen set, and when you play these things, you're weaving stories. I remember when I was small and I used to play kitchen set with my neighbors. Then it used to be like, okay, today I will come to your house. Okay, let us pretend you cook for me. I'll come to your house. We'll all have tea together. Things like that. Then you're weaving a story, even in that playfulness, no, when you're playing with your friends, you're weaving a story, and that in itself is creativity. Now these four siblings, the three sisters and the brother, they used to do that. They used to do storytelling playfully. When they were youngsters, they would play with each other, and they would like orally participate in storytelling. This was their creativity being inculcated, and later, of course, they all became great writers. So their creativity in storytelling, and while they were playing with each other, this is how they passed their times. They were close to each other, and this is set in an intricate imaginary world, and then through the collaborative writing of increasingly complex stories set in their fictional world. So first it was orally, that okay, we have this today, I will be the leader, I will be the king, tomorrow we are going to go and wage war against that kingdom. It's all child's play, the children are playing, and gradually as they grew up, it turned to writing. They used to write down plots for this fictional world. I'm going to talk about this as we move on further. Now I hope you understand this, that you have an influence on each other, and this is how their creativity was being filtered through their childhood. So the deaths of their mother and two older sisters marked them and influenced their writing profoundly, as did their isolated upbringing. They were raised in a religious family. So this is the background of the writer overall. Okay, we're going to dive deep into it, of course, but see, the deaths of their mother. Their mother passed away when they were kids itself, and the two older sisters as well. So Maria and Elizabeth passed away. Now see, literary family, you might have questioned, right, that Charlotte, Emily, Anne, and even Patrick, they were into the writing imaginary world thing. What about Maria and Elizabeth? I did not mention anything about Maria and Elizabeth. So that questioning in your mind should always go on, that what about Maria and Elizabeth? If all of them are such great writers, then the first two elders must be great writers as well. But the truth of their life, or the sad truth of their life, is that they passed away at an early age. They were in school, in fact, at the time, and it was a very early, unfortunate death in the family. And their death, as well as their mother's death, went ahead and influenced, or they impacted all the other siblings as well. So had Maria and Elizabeth lived longer, probably they would be writers as well. That's a probability, we don't know. But after their sad deaths, untimely deaths, and of course early deaths, it impacted the siblings a lot, and it influenced their writings profoundly. When you read their writings, you're going to find mention about this. That influence is always there, as did their isolated upbringing. So in times to come, they were brought up isolatedly. They were not that social. They would not be so social as to converse with each other. And I will give this in the book recommendation, but I'm still just mentioning it now. If you read Agnes Grey, it's by Anne Brontë. If you read Agnes Grey, then you will understand. It's sort of like a autobiography. The Agnes Grey, it reflects their lives itself, and this isolation and everything, it features in that book. So anyway, so you have their isolated upbringing, and they were raised in a religious family. So because they were raised in a religious family, naturally there's this influence of religion, right? You will find that in their writings also. There are religious topics that they deal with in their writings as well. So like I said, that this is to highlight the point that every writer's life has an influence in their writings, and that is why we study them. So now we're going to look at each of the sisters one by one. Now let's have a look at Charlotte Brontë. Charlotte Brontë was an English novelist and poet, the eldest of the three Brontë sisters who survived into adulthood. So it's pretty sad, because Maria and Elizabeth, like I told you, they had an untimely death, early death. They did not even enter adulthood. They were children, literally. They did not enter adulthood also. So Charlotte Bronte, Emily and Anne are the only ones who entered into adulthood, and Charlotte Bronte's novels became classics of English literature. So we all know that. Of course, we know Jane Eyre, right, is a classic. So she is best known for her novel Jane Eyre, which she published under the androgynous name Curabell or Currer So she adopted a pseudonym. She adopted another name. She did not publish Jane Eyre in her own name. We are going to talk about the reasons behind this after a few slides. But for now, just know that she did not use her own name. She used another name, and that is Currer or Curabell. Okay, so she used this name when she published Jane Eyre, and Bronte was the last to die of all her siblings. So she was the last to die of all her siblings, in the sense that Maria and all the siblings died of tuberculosis except for Charlotte. Charlotte died because of a complication in pregnancy. She died because of a complication during pregnancy or in pregnancy, and all the other sisters died of tuberculosis. Okay, so she was the last one to die of all her siblings. She became pregnant shortly after her wedding in June 1854, but died on 31st March 1855. That is not even 1 year. So because of that, and after the deaths of his older daughters, Patrick removed Charlotte and Emily from the school. So Patrick is not I'm not talking about Patrick Branwell. That is, I'm not talking about the brother. I am talking about the father. Charlotte's father removed Charlotte and Emily. So it's Maria, Elizabeth, Emily and Charlotte, who were studying in one school, and the sanitation in that school was very bad. The conditions in the school was very bad, and that affected that affected Maria and Elizabeth, the eldest two daughters, and they had tuberculosis as a result of that. So after their deaths, the father removed Charlotte and Emily from the school also. So there were 4 sisters. Anne was not of age. Anne was still a kid that time. So the 4 sisters were studying in this school, and after the elder 2 sisters died, Charlotte and Emily was also removed. The father removed them from the school. So remember, I talked about isolated upbringing and also this comes into that. So Charlotte used the school as the basis for Lowood School in Jane Eyre. So if you read Jane Eyre, you will actually get a glimpse into the kind of conditions that were there in the school. So she, like I said just a few moments ago, that literature is an expression of life, and the experiences of the writers go a long way into influencing their work. So here again you see how her life actually inspired the Lowood School, the concept for the Lowood School. So in Jane Eyre, when you'll come across the Lowood School, just remember that this is a reflection of the actual conditions that they had to go through in the school. So which is similarly affected by tuberculosis, that is exacerbated by the poor conditions. So this is Charlotte Bronte. Major points that you have to remember about her life. Now the works in order. So first Jane Eyre, of course, it's a classic. Then you have Shirley, then you have Villette, The Professor, and Emma. So these are the works. Alongside, I've included the year of their publication as well. And you have to remember that Charlotte Bronte also served as a teacher in Roe Head from 1835 to 1838. So she served as a teacher. Now see, for girls during the Victorian era, there was not much job opportunities, and the jobs that women most sought after, or the jobs that probably a woman can do or could do, was that of a governess or of a teacher. So Charlotte Bronte served as a teacher. So that goes a long way into saying how much these women have contributed, right? They were independent women. So she served as a teacher in Roe Head. It's a school, or it's a place, from 1835 to 1838. So this is Charlotte Bronte. Now we're going to move on to Emily Bronte. But before that, I'm going to talk about that imaginary town. Remember that they weaved that imaginary storytelling. We're going to talk about this imaginary town, this imaginary place that all these siblings weaved. Okay, so let's just talk about that. So let us talk about this fictional town called Glasstown, okay, which all these 4 siblings actually weaved. This is their fictional town, Glasstown, and we have to know what the importance is, okay, and it has a lot of importance. One might not really understand this, but once you with regards to English literature, I'm saying it's not just the novels or the books that are interesting. These facts are interesting as well, because it goes a long way into shaping the author's mind. So Glasstown, let us have a, like, when you're shaping an author's mind, it's of course the experiences of life, right? So what importance does Glasstown have in relation to the Bronte sisters or the Bronte family? So at home in Haworth parsonage, Bronte acted, or Charlotte Bronte acted as the motherly friend and guardian of her younger sisters. And you know, she was the eldest, right? Then she became the eldest after the death of Maria and Elizabeth. The eldest two daughters, after they passed away, Charlotte was the eldest, right? So she acted as the motherly friend and guardian of her younger sisters. So, you know, she made sure that she set an example for them to look up to. She actually took care of them like a sister and a mother. So Charlotte Bronte wrote her first known poem at the age of 13 in 1829 and was to go on to write more than 200 poems in the course of her life. Many of her poems were published in their homemade magazine, Branwell's Blackwood magazine. So if you get a question, if there are options, if it's the Brontes, there are two kinds of magazines, okay? One is Blackwood's magazine, that is different. That does not have anything to do with the Brontes. But Branwell's Blackwood's magazine is a homemade published magazine. It's a homemade magazine, and this has to do with the Brontes, the Bronte family. So they published, why is that published in quotes? It's their own magazine and they're putting their works into it, right? That's why publish. Publish is like when you go to another magazine, you're like, please publish my work. But this is they're doing it themselves, right? So that's why, but nonetheless, these are published works in their homemade magazine, Branwell's Blackwood's magazine, and concern the fictional world of Glasstown, Anglia. So this is the world that we're going to concern ourselves with, and we're going to learn what importance does it hold. So their reading fed their imagination. So they had access to their home's library, the books in the library that they had, and their reading fed their imaginations. You know, they were creative as it is, and their creativity soared after their father gave Branwell, that is the son, a set of toy soldiers in June 1826. So the father presented the brother, right, Patrick Branwell. So the father gave Branwell a set of toy soldiers, and they gave names to the soldiers, or they used to call it the 12s. The toy soldiers, they named it the 12s and developed their characters. So you see, you know, our childhood, when we go to play, right, why nowadays people say that too much on the phone is not good? Because that period, right, when you're playing, you're actually letting your imagination grow. Your thinking capacity and creative capacity grows when you socialize with kids like that and play with kids like that. So that is the importance of childhood. That is the importance of these experiences. So look at them. They started with oral storytelling. Then their father just gave Branwell a soldier. Then they started naming these soldiers and playing with them, developing plot lines. They developed their characters even. How creative is that? So, you know, this led to the creation of an imaginary world, the African kingdom of Angria, which was illustrated with maps and watercolor renderings. So you see, they developed maps, that this is the map of our world, you know, and they even they did this with maps and watercolor renderings. Look at the level of creativity that these kids had at that time. And the children devised plots about the inhabitants of Angria and its capital city, Glasstown. So, you know, they had they have this Angria. You can consider it like a country, and then you have the capital city, Glasstown, and later it was called Variopolis or the Vardopolis, but just remember Glasstown, it's important. So the city's capital was Glasstown, and you know, they developed plots about this whole place. You know, they're talking about the plots, they're developing plots, character development. This is feeding into their creative energy, right? So she and her surviving siblings, Branwell, Emily, and Anne, created this shared world and began chronicling the lives and struggles of the inhabitants of the imaginary kingdom in 1827. So can you see the richness of these siblings? They influence each other, they talk to each other, they help in story weaving and plotting. And you know, it's not just the three sisters. Remember that when it comes to Glasstown, it's the brother as well. that is Branwell, Patrick Branwell. So Charlotte in private letters called Glasstown her world below, a private escape where she could act out her desires and multiple identities. This is very, very important. This is where Glasstown becomes important. You know the characteristics of the Victorian age, largely strict society. Etiquettes for a woman was very clearly demarcated. You're supposed to behave this way. You're not supposed to read a novel. You're not supposed to read and write. You're supposed to take your education in kind. In fact, you know, there were first women's colleges. You did get elementary and secondary schooling for women as well. But that's not the kind of education that they stressed on. A woman's place was already always secondary to her husband even. So that's the kind of era that we're talking about. And then also they had something like domestic science. You know, and some schools also gave, they gave teachings in cooking and laundry also. So you see the kind of teachings that the women had to go through during the Victorian era. So this is what we're talking about. You're supposed to get married. You're supposed to go and have children. Don't think about too many jobs that men have. You know, teacher and governess is fine, but don't think that you're going to go and become a shopkeeper. Don't think you're going to go and do this. You have clearly demarcated boundaries. You have to stay within those boundaries as a Victorian woman. And the way you behave, your table manners, your etiquettes, everything is defined, clearly defined. You're not supposed to express yourself too loudly, dress too loudly, because you'll be judged then, you know. The Victorian society was like that, and you know, you're not supposed to even attempt to publish a novel. I'm going to talk about this. You're not supposed to attempt to publish a novel. People won't take you seriously. Those kind of strands were a part of the Victorian society, and you were supposed to have, as a woman, you're supposed to just marry and have children, raise a household. There was a clear distinction between the private sphere and the public sphere. The private sphere was for the women, public sphere for the men. So, you know, Victorian society had all of these negatives also. So, you know, for her, when she created Glasstown, she could express herself there. You know, in front of people, she had to be prim, proper, take care of herself. But in her world below, Glasstown, where she expressed herself, she could weave stories. She could express her desires through her characters and, you know, her multiple identities. That, you know, in a society where you try to define everything, you're trying to define a woman should be like this, you're actually concising it, right? You're not letting her be free. You're just like defining it. And when you define something, I remember this famous quote, okay, I forgot the writer, but he said, to define is to limit. To define is to limit. So when you're defining that a woman should or should not be like this, you're actually not allowing her to express herself. So when she created this Glasstown, she explored her multiple identities. She did not have to be a particular type. She did not have to be a lady, you know, a particular type of lady. She just could be herself and she could express herself. That is where Glasstown attains importance. Now, however, from 1831 onwards, Emily and Anne seceded from the Glasstown Confederacy to create a spin-off called Gondal. So what happens is, you have Glasstown and then Emily and Anne also were a part of it. All the siblings, 4 siblings. You have Charlotte Bronte, you have Branwell, Patrick Branwell, the brother, and then you have Emily Bronte and Anne Bronte. Now these 4 were part of this Glasstown. They would create imaginary places. Then Emily and Anne, no, they cut off from it. They created their own world, and this is Gondal, which included many of their poems. So this is a critic, I think Christine Alexander, a Bronte juvenile. Okay, she's a historian, she's a scholar. She wrote that both Charlotte and Branwell ensured the consistency of the imaginary world. So they did not let Glasstown go. Glasstown was continued and was continued by Branwell and Charlotte, and Gondal was Emily and Anne. So this is Glasstown and the importance of Glasstown. So we're going to now move on to the next sister, next literary genius, Emily Bronte. Now, before we go on to the last 2 sisters, that is Emily Bronte and Anne Bronte, let us talk about the first publications, because this is very, very important. So in May 1846, Charlotte, Emily and Anne self-financed the publication of a joint collection of poems under their assumed names, Currer, Alice and Acton Bell. So the pseudonyms means, it means that you're not using your own name, you've adopted or assumed another name, okay? So the pseudonyms veiled the sisters' sex while preserving their initials. They veiled, that is, they kind of veil means when you put a veil in front of yourself, it's like a curtain, okay? So a veil, it veiled or it hid. It was hiding their sex, that is the female sex, that they were women. It was hiding that fact while preserving their initials. So, you know, Charlotte starts with a C, so she became Currer Bell. Then you have Emily, starts with an E, so she became Ellis Bell. And then you have Anne, she adopted Acton as her pseudonym, so Acton Bell. So they preserved the initials, but the new names, the pseudonyms, hid the fact that they were women. Now, Bell was the middle name of Haworth's curate, Arthur Bell Nicholas, whom Charlotte later married. So, you know, she randomly probably just thought that, okay, you know, she knows this title and she just adopted that title as Bell. There's no specific reason for it. So we just know that it was her husband's initial, okay, I mean her husband's title, Bell. Now, of the decision to use noms de plume, Charlotte wrote, that is, noms de plume means the assumed name, the pseudonym. No, why did she use this pseudonym? She herself wrote, she herself gave these reasons why they adopted the pseudonyms, and this is where it becomes important. Averse to personal publicity, that is, we did not want publicity. She and her sisters and also her brother, of course, these siblings, they had this creative energy and they enjoyed it. So they did not do it for publicity. So they said we were averse to personal publicity. We did not want to publicize ourselves too much. So that is why, first of all, we did not give our own names, and we veiled our own names under those of Currer, Ellis and Acton Bell. While we did not like to declare ourselves women, because we veiled ourselves first because we did not want publicity, and secondly, why did we veil the fact that we are women? They could have even taken women names, right? They could have taken women names, but they adopted male names. This is also a question that should come to our mind, right? They can take any pseudonym, but they took male pseudonyms. Now, why? So they said that first, publicity, of course, we did not want. And why did we hide the fact that we were women? Why? It is because we had a vague impression that authoresses are liable to be looked down on with prejudice. So that is the Victorian age for you. So the authoresses, okay, women writers were liable, there's a possibility, to be looked down upon with prejudice. And we had noticed how critics sometimes use for their chastisement the weapon of personality. That sometimes critics criticize the personality, they use the weapon of chastisement, they use the weapon of personality. That, okay, it's a woman, so let's criticize. Okay, so this is the weak point, you know, that kind of a thing. They wanted to avoid that. And for their sorry, my laptop just gave some problem. 1 second. Okay, and for that reward, a flattery which is not true praise. So sometimes, you know, the possibility, I'm just giving an example. A woman writer is writing. So just for flattery, you're saying, okay, she writes well, but that's not true praise. You're not praising, you're just giving flattery, and that's not what she wanted, because she wanted her intellect to be, or her creativity to be appreciated. Not that she's a woman, so, you know, just flattery, use flattery, not that. And also because of her sex, sometimes critics themselves criticize, because it's a woman, so you could not write well. You know, there was a prejudice against authoresses. So this is the Victorian age for you. This is why they actually adopted the pseudonyms. And although only 2 copies of the collection of poems were sold, the sisters continued writing for publication and began their first novels, continuing to use their noms de plume, or their pseudonyms, or their assumed names, when sending manuscripts to potential publishers. So you see, I told you that the society was not as kind to women as it is now. So, you know, women writers were not looked on with inspiration. You do not look up to women writers. Rather, they were looked down upon. So they wanted to avoid that, and also they did not want publicity. So this is about the first publication. Now we're going to talk about Emily Brontë. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Emily Brontë. Now, Emily Jane Brontë was an English novelist and poet who is best known for her only novel, Wuthering Heights, now considered a classic of English literature. So this is something that we have to remember, that she wrote only one novel, Wuthering Heights, and that itself is a classic. So it is one of my favorite books, and I'm sure that when I'm going to recommend it to you, we already talked about Wuthering Heights in my gothic fiction or gothic novel recommendations, but I'm going to talk about other aspects of Wuthering Heights in the book recommendations that I'm going to give in the next video. So Emily Jane Brontë, her only novel is Wuthering Heights. She also published a book of poetry with her sisters, Charlotte and Anne, titled Poems by Currer, Ellis and Acton Bell. So these are the three books of importance which we have to remember. You have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and then she has written other poems, other books as well. Then you have Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and then you have poems by Currer, Ellis and Acton Bell, and with her own poems finding regard as poetic genius. So her poems have been regarded as a work of genius, you know, so that's how creative Emily Bronte was. Emily was the second youngest of the four surviving Bronte siblings, between the youngest Anne and her brother Branwell. So I've already discussed the family tree, so I think it's clear now. When Emily was only 3 and all 6 children under the age of 8, she and her siblings lost their mother. All of them were under 8 and she was just 3, so she lost her mother at a very young age. So this is significant. All the other children were under the age of 8, and that's when Charlotte decided, remember, that she'd take care of her siblings. I mentioned it in her slide. So she and her siblings lost their mother Maria to cancer on 15th September 1821. So their mother Maria to cancer, that is, she was suffering, and 15th September 1821 was when she passed away. And the younger children were to be cared for Elizabeth Branwell, their aunt, and Maria's sister. So this Elizabeth Branwell was their aunt and their mother's sister. Their mother's sister, that is Maria's sister, and they were to be cared for by her. But remember, I told you that in the slide where I dealt with Charlotte Bronte, that she was the one who actually acted as the motherly friend and guardian of her younger sisters. So that's the role that she played as well in bringing up these sisters, right? And Emily's 3 elder sisters, Maria, Elizabeth and Charlotte, were sent to the clergy daughter school at Cowan Bridge. So see, this is the name of the school, Clergy Daughter School, where they contracted tuberculosis, right? So this is the school which, again, Charlotte Bronte, she's the one who actually depicts this school in Jane Eyre as well. Remember, I mentioned. So this is the name of the original school. So what happens is, at the age of 6, Emily joined her sisters at school for a brief period. At school, however, the children suffered abuse and privations, and when a typhoid epidemic swept the school, Maria and Elizabeth became ill. Maria, who was actually Maria, who may actually have had tuberculosis, was sent home, where she died, and Elizabeth died shortly after. So you see, this is the kind of conditions that were there in the school, and you'll find it depicted in Jane Eyre itself. So this is the real life incidents that have happened in their lives as well. So the 4 youngest Bronte children, all under 10 years of age, had suffered the loss of 3 eldest women in their immediate family. So naturally, that's going to have an influence in their sensibilities, in their lives, in their writings as well. So shy girl Emily was very close to her siblings and was known as a great animal lover, especially for befriending stray dogs she found wandering around the countryside. You'll find this expressed in her novel as well. The love for the countryside, in her descriptions in Wuthering Heights, you'll find it. And this love for animals, it's not just her. Even Anne Bronte was a lover of animals, and you'll find it depicted in Agnes Grey. Her love for animals, right? She depicts it in her novel Agnes Grey. And however, when Emily was 13, she and Anne withdrew from participation in the Angria story. Remember that Glass Town? I told you they cut off from that, then they made their own story, right? So this is about that. And began one about Gondal, a fictional island whose myths and legends were to preoccupy the 2 sisters throughout their lives. With the exception of their Gondal poems and Anne's list of Gondal's characters and place names, Emily and Anne's Gondal writings were largely not preserved. So except for these few things, it was not largely preserved, but you just have to remember that Glasstown and Gondal had its own importance because they allowed the sisters to express themselves freely. So now we're going to go on to the last slide, which is about Anne Bronte, the youngest of the Bronte sisters. So, Anne Bronte was an English novelist and poet, the youngest member of the Bronte literary family. Her first novel, Agnes Grey, was published in 1847 at the same time as Wuthering Heights by her sister Emily Bronte. So, Emily Bronte published Wuthering Heights, right? So, around the same time, even Agnes Grey was published. It was Anne Bronte's first novel. So, her second novel, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, was published in 1848. The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is often considered one of the first feminist novels. I have read the novel and it is very nice. You'll find even character traits of Anne Bronte herself in some of the characters. So it is considered one of the first feminist novels because it surrounds around a woman. I'm not going to give too much away. I will leave it for the recommendation, but it centers around a woman. She and her struggles in her life. So this is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. So both of her novels are considered classics of English literature. Both of her novels are considered classics of English literature. You will see the expectations of the society expressed in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. You'll see the hypocrisies of the society being reflected in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and you will also see the struggles of women, how they keep quiet and how much potential do they have, but sometimes they're very barred to actually reach their full potential even in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. So this is considered one of the first feminist novels. Okay, so you have to remember that The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is a second novel, not her first. It's a second novel, not her first, and it is often considered one of the first feminist novels. A year after leaving the school and aged 19, Anne was seeking a teaching position. She was the daughter of a poor clergyman and needed to earn money. So this is understandable. Her father had no private income, and the parsonage would revert to the church on his death. So the parsonage where they were staying, the house, I'll just give it simply. Suppose they were paying rent. Okay, I'm just giving an idea. They're giving rent for in the place where they're staying. The moment the father passed away, then that house would go to the church, because they did not have any private income, no, to sustain themselves. So teaching or working as a governess were among the few options for a poor and educated woman. So in April 1839, Anne started work as a governess for the Ingham family at Blake Hall near Murfield. Now see, I told you that women did not have much opportunities, even though they received elementary and secondary education, and there were some colleges also. But you know, they were still expected to take care of the family. They would still be respected if they would be a householder. So those things are there in the Victorian society. So she thought that, okay, I'll work as a governess. She was educated. She said that I'll work as a governess. I'll try to earn for the family. And so this is where she was employed, in Ingham family, in the Ingham family at Blake Hall near Murfield. So from 1840 to 1845, Anne worked at Thorpe Green Hall, a comfortable country house near York. Here she was governess to the children of the Reverend Edmund Robinson and his wife Lydia. So she worked in two places as a governess, first in Blake Hall and second in Thorpe Green Hall. So both of them, you'll find their descriptions in Agnes Grey, her first novel. She'll describe everything that she went through there. Of course, she changes the names of the characters, but she does describe everything that she goes through in Agnes Grey. She describes everything that she goes through in Agnes Grey, and that in itself reflects, I told you, like literature is a reflection of the life itself. So this is where she's coming from. Emily's death deeply affected Anne. Her grief undermined her physical health. So Emily passed away, right, I told you, of tuberculosis again. So over Christmas, Anne had influenza. Her symptoms intensified, and in early January, her father sent for a Leeds physician. So the doctor diagnosed advanced consumption with little hope of recovery. So there was little hope of recovery. Okay, so Anne met the news with characteristic determination and self-control. So she met, of course it affected her, you know, that there was little hope for her, so it affected her, but she met the news with characteristic determination and self-control. That means this was in her character, inbuilt self-control and determination. Self-control and determination is in her character. You'll find it reflected in the woman character in Tenant of Wildfell Hall as well. You'll find it reflected in the woman character of Wildfell Hall, and you'll find it reflected in the character of Agnes Grey. So that is why many people say that Agnes Grey is an autobiography, because Agnes Grey comes off as self-determined. She is relentless. She does not. She's resilient, and she has this sense of determination and self-control. So does Anne Brontë. So you have determination and self-control. The same month, she wrote her last poem. A dreadful darkness closes in which she deals with being terminally ill. And Anne seemed somewhat better in February. She decided to visit Scarborough to see if the change of location and the fresh sea air might benefit her. So she just had a change of location, you know. Anne died at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday 28th May 1849, aged 29, in Scarborough itself. Like, she did not come back home. When she changed her location there, that's where she passed away. And Charlotte decided to lay the flower where it had fallen. So Anne was buried in Scarborough itself. So she too died of tuberculosis, and she was buried in the place that she passed away. And with this, we come to the end of this video. I hope that this video has been interesting and helpful for you all. I think that learning the life of the authors and writers and poets give us an insight into their minds itself and their lives itself, which go a long way into influencing their works. So with this, I think when I recommend the Bronte sisters' works to you, you'll be more interested in reading them. And that's it for today, guys. With this, we come to the end of this video, and I sincerely hope that the video was helpful for you all. And if it has been helpful, then please don't forget to like the video, share the video, and subscribe to my channel for similar content. And if you are about literature and all things literature, then this is the place to be. And till we meet again, I really hope that you stay healthy and happy. See you in the next one, guys.